Hi!
Hi!
We are Nikita
And Katya.
and today we'll be sharing with you our local perspective on the life in Russia, and to be precise, in Moscow, because we live here.
So, how is it to live in Moscow and what do we hate about it?
So we'll share with you top 10 things that we hate about Moscow, plus one thing that sounds like true, but actually is fake.
Which
one it is? Which one?
Which one? Let's start. Oh, distances. That's definitely number one thing that we hate about Moscow. If we take just the inner part of Moscow and measure it, it will be from north to south 38 kilometers. 38 kilometers! It's 6 kilometers more than La Manche. Being 38 kilometers, it's a 60-minute drive, which makes it, in Moscow traffic, up to 2 hours. Which makes it crazy! Because your flight to Riga can be shorter than your drive to the airport. And that brings us to the next point.
Traffic! Oh, Moscow traffic. It's a legend. We don't even have a driving license. And this because an average muscovite spends in a year 91 hours in traffic jams. This only second place after LA, which is 102 hours. Imagine what you can do with 91 hours. You can read War and Peace, you can find love, you can learn a new language, or you can watch another season of Game of Thrones. But instead, you stay in a traffic jam. So yeah, we prefer public transport. Next point.
Rent prices. Rent prices. Rent prices! If I would wanna have a little studio, 20 minutes from work, somewhere in the center of Moscow, it would cost me $1,500 to $2,000 a month. And that's for the studio. 10 square meters, okay? Fortunately, Moscow is huge, so somewhere in the suburbs, far away from the center, I can rent 2-room apartment, around 50-40 square meters for the same price. Taking into account the sizes of our city, that will make you commute every day to your work around 40 minutes. Also, the outskirts of our city are a bit different in architecture away from the center, and that brings us to the next point.
Ugly suburbs. In UK, they call it social housing. In France, le logement social. In Moscow, I finally have an apartment in the city! Yes! Unfortunately, on the outskirts, architecture is not super nice. It's usually 16 to 20 story high block made out of concrete panels or bricks, which main inspiration was a fridge box. It doesn't look inspiring, but we have to take into account that infrastructure is rather nice. In every district they have hospitals, schools, kindergartens, and every district is connected to the city center quite efficiently by buses, metro and trams. It's also usually clean and green with nice parks, and you can easily explain why the buildings are that huge and that ugly. There are just way too many people in Moscow, and that brings us to the next point.
Overcrowded. Dream city for all the Russians, Moscow has much higher salaries than average Russia. It's 1,400 compared to 700 in general. It also has a lot of the opportunities like the good education, healthcare and work. So this attracts a lot of the former USSR Republic people like Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Ukraine, Armenia, etc. That makes us 17 million people only in the city center, plus 5 million people coming from the outskirts to work every day. That can get pretty crowded, so don't forget to book your restaurants in advance and your tickets to Bolshoi as well. Most of the migrants are coming to Moscow by airplanes, which brings us to the next point.
Taxi drivers. Oh, taxi drivers. The masters of fraud. The legendary man in blue jeans and black leather jackets. Not speaking a word of English. And trying to convince you that they agreed on a $500 price for a 15-kilometer ride on the very beginning of your ride. The wizards of disobeying the traffic law and getting offended when you fasten your seatbelt. Okay, that one is not true anymore, but like 10 years ago, that was like that. The minute you step out of arrivals, like birds they scream, "Taxi! Taxi! Taxi!" telling you that you can negotiate on the price later. And taking you to the nearest 15-year-old Zhiguli car. It all changed a little, but still, when you come to Moscow, it's better to use apps like Yandex Taxi or really to get the fair price. That's the only way. But there's also an option to take the metro. Which brings us to the next point.
Moscow metro is always late. Delays are happening every day. By average, a muscovite loses around 1 hour a week because of that. The main reason are strikes of the Moscow metro workers, which are happening more and more frequently. Also, bad condition of the rails and the super old trains, which are not only breaking all the time, but also are super loud. Which brings us to the next point!
Loud metros. And you probably have heard that Moscow metro is rather beautiful. And it is! But nevertheless, they started introducing new quiet trains. On some of the 16 lines of Moscow metros, they still use the ones from 1980s or 1990s. And my god, if they are loud. I haven't heard in my life anything as loud as that. Just listen for yourself. And that's cause they don't use AC, but they have holes in the roof through which fresh air comes into the train itself. And that's not the perfect aerodynamic system at all, by any means. And considering the fact that Moscow trains are going up to 90 kilometers an hour, it makes them on some of the stations as loud as 97 decibels. To compare, jet engine of a plane, 120. In metro it's not only loud, but there is also no sun, because it's underground. And the lack of sun brings us to the next point.
Lack of sun. In winter in Moscow it can be, if not dark, but definitely not sunny. Facts will speak better. This December we had only 8 hours of sunlight. 8 hours! And for the whole winter it's 72 hours! Thus, out of 90 days of winter, it was just 3 days of sunlight. It was a little bit of an anomaly this year, but still. Nevertheless, in winter it might be tough. In spring and summer we have a lot of sunny days with a nice and warm weather. On those days, you feel the eager to jump into a kind of pool or pond or the river, which brings us to the next point.
Dirty river in which you cannot swim. Moscow River, which lies within city waters with 80 kilometers, is super dirty and not suitable for swimming at all. Some say you shouldn't even touch the water. Which is a pity, because it has really nice embankments, and back in the Soviet time it was actually used for a swimming school. To get the idea on the pollution levels, at the exit from the city, in the water of the river, there are 50 times more oil products than at the entrance to it. Nevertheless, it makes us very sad. By the research of the Ecological Institute, each year river becomes cleaner by average of 10%. Fortunately, in Moscow there are lots of pools, some of which are open air, and they operate the whole year round. Water is heated, and in the evenings there they have film screenings and parties. In Moscow it's rather hard to find a place where you can swim in open water. But still, which one of those facts that we told you is fake?
Distances,
Late metro.
traffic,
Loud metro.
rent prices,
Lack of sun.
overcrowdedness,
Or the dirty river.
airport taxi drivers.
We give you 5 seconds to decide. Moscow trains are not always late. Actually, Moscow metro system is the most efficient metro system in the world, with the accuracy of train being of 99.997%. During rush hour, interval between the trains can get down to 60 seconds, which is rather impressive, on average being just 2 minutes. So that's it.
And nevertheless, we thought about 10 things that we hate about Moscow. It was pretty hard for us, because we love Moscow.
And even so, there are some things that can be proved. Advantages of living in the city outperform disadvantages easily. And in the next video we'll talk with you about top 10 plus 1 fake things that we love about Moscow. See you in a bit!
Ciao!
And by Putin is not in the video.
He's retired.